We're going to go to the congregation side, but it's also a little bit more philosophic and theological exploration about understanding dementia than we've done through the earlier part of the day. So we're skipping through this. If anybody's going to reject apocalyptic demography, it's going to be persons of faith. So the old story, I'm going to put these up here. We are very wont in this country. We don't just create programs to deal with social or other issues. We declare war on them. It's just sort of our way as a culture. The war on drugs, how's that one going? The war on poverty. We actually dare to declare war on terror itself, which is an odd concept when you think about it, right? So we are prone to use these military metaphors and things, the language of warfare. So as we talk about dementia in general, Alzheimer's disease, you saw this in some of the things we posted from the Alzheimer's Association. The people are victims. That's war language, isn't it? Dementia is a disease that strikes, attacks people's brains, robs, creates burden, must be vanquished. That's the way we frame things to scare us. So why do we use these kinds of primal metaphors? Why do we use the language of apocalyptic demography? Well, here's one framework for it. It's Tom Cole, a historian, came up with this little sketch saying it has to do in large part with the sources from which we are deriving our sense of meaning. And noted that through most of human history, meaning was drawn from the cosmic scale. We took meaning in our lives by how our lives were in relationship to the transcendent and divine. And that was the primary source of meaning. Am I straight with God? Am I in harmony with God's will? Is my name, if you're a Jew, written in the book of life? You know, we have all this terminology, but just things that have immediacy in our lives have much less impact and are less threatening if our secure sense of identity is rooted in something so vast and beyond us. Okay? And he said gradually that became supplanted by social meaning, or we might even say supplemented by social meaning, knowing my role in family and village and such. So again, what happened to me individually was somewhat softened or mitigated by me being woven into relationship with others in my village, my tribe, my community, my cosmos, my deity. But noting in the time of the Enlightenment, particularly in the 20th century, the source of meaning is almost entirely individual. I create my own meaning. It's me and me alone. And if that is our primary source of meaning, and therefore of worth and of value, we get to this wonderful quote by historian Jesse Ballinger. Senility haunts the landscape of the self-made man. Because if my cognitive wonderfulness is the only thing that gives my life meaning and value and worth, losing that is the most frightening and threatening thing I can imagine. But if I understand the meaning and worth of my life on a much bigger scale, not quite as terrifying. I'm kind of okay with that piece of it. That the fear is largely the creation of a hyper-cognitive, hyper-individual way of understanding self. And that's a drum we've been pretty much beating all day. We'd like to think that congregations are a place that tell a different story about what has meaning and worth and value. And this phrase, I love it a whole lot. This was developed by a couple of dear friends, a theologian named Stanley Hauerwas at Duke Divinity School, and a political scientist in Chicago named Mike Buddy, in working together to create an organization called the Ecclesia Project. That's the organization that published a little pamphlet some of you picked up that is also available on the web. But it said if we're doing it right in a congregation, that congregation is should be understood as a school for subversive friendship. A flourishing congregation always has this element to it. What do we mean by subversive? Well, one, any congregation that understands its calling, identity, and mission is proclaiming that loyalty to the church is a higher and greater loyalty than that to the nation state or to the economy. That's subversive already, isn't it? That we have a higher loyalty than American consumer capitalism. But subversive also, this is Stanley Hauerwas again, said congregations are where we learn how to be friends with God. Now, how do you learn how to be friends with God? Well, by living faithful friendships with other people who also wish to be friends of God. That's the school part. We're teaching each other friendship in that most profoundly faithful and spiritual way, and that's how we become friends of God, which I've always been kind of fond of. But here's a piece as we get closer to the theme of dementia. Maintaining and valuing friendships that are not based upon obvious reciprocity are by definition subversive in a consumer culture context. And to kind of fully understand that, I'm going to skip by here. We need to get back to our old friend Aristotle. And all of our writing about friendship, all of our thinking about friendship really does go back to Aristotle, who you all study in Philosophy 101 somewhere along the way, right? So just to review what you have right on the tip of your tongues in a very brief manner, Aristotle talking about the three forms of friendship, two of them incomplete, only one of them complete. Now you need to, just in all fairness, bear in mind a couple things. Aristotle lived in a very different world. And the Greek word philia, friendship, is a little bit different from our word friendship because it really encompasses all your relationships, including what we might consider business relationships or others. He also lived in a little Greek village, a smaller world, where the people you regard as close friends were at most a 20-minute walk away. You know, he did not have to email his friends, right? But he actually argued that we probably could not maintain more than 8 or 9 true friendships in life because he couldn't imagine a real friendship that involves spending fewer than 2 or 3 hours a week together. So what kind of friendship would that be? How could you possibly really live a friendship unless you're spending several hours a week with your friend? Interesting to think about in terms of our context of friends who are half a country away, or your children are half a country away, and all these different categories of friends we have. But I think his root thing holds very, very well. He said many friendships, or what we call friendships, are based upon utility. In short, what can this person do for me? And what do I have to do for that person to get him to do it for me? How can we be useful to each other? Social contract, business relationship. My friends are the people who will advance my career, who will get me into the social circle I want to get into. My friends are the people who drive my kids to soccer practice or do this or that. If a friendship, Aristotle said, of this kind, if we no longer find it useful, we are free to give ourselves permission to abandon it, to drop friendships that are not useful. Therefore, these kinds of friendship are temporary and incomplete. Now, don't want to overstate that because all friends should want to be helpful or useful to one another, right? But if that's all the friendship is about, Aristotle said, it's an incomplete friendship. It will be discarded. It will be abandoned. And again, we're kind of back to, and I keep harping on the phrase, the constructs of consumer capitalism. So many relationships that get casually described as friendship are really business relationships of mutual usefulness. I had a conversation some years ago, a guy I hadn't seen in about a half a year who had retired. And we were working together in a Salvation Army Christmas project. You know, you chat while you're putting gifts into boxes or whatever. And I said, John, what has been the single biggest surprise for you about life after retirement? He didn't hesitate. He said, finding out how many of what I thought were friendships were business relationships. And it wasn't quite so hard and mean as people saying, well, he can't do anything for me anymore. I'm not going to bother to call him anymore. But just no longer encountering one another in that casual, everyday brushing up against each other in the office or whatever and saying, hey, let's grab a drink after work, let's grab lunch tomorrow. There wasn't enough true underlying caring about each other to move either party to take that initiative. That the friendship was formed in the context of a common world of commerce, and it wasn't so crass as just using one another. But without that usefulness, without that common pool of commerce, if you will, there was nothing to sustain the friendship. I think that's more true historically for men than for women. To the great sorrow of women, you're catching up to us in that regard. You know, women are learning men's bad habits of social relationship, among other things, and health practices. But men, you know, we all know the stories about the men who 6 months after retirement drop over dead and don't know who they are anymore. And part of this, I think, that their whole world of friendships was formed and maintained by being in that world of mutual usefulness in business. So, you know, Aristotle nailed that one a long time ago. His second category of incomplete friendships are friendships based upon pleasure. Fun to be with. We have good times together. We have the same tastes and interests. I call these friendships celebrated in beer commercials. You know, good times, good friends, good beer, you know, that kind of, we're hip, we're happening, we're texting, we're doing all this stuff. And it's just fun to be together. We cheer for the same sports team. Sometimes that extends to when we vote for the same political party. We're just like each other. And indeed, there's a lot of evidence that so-called friendships in our country are becoming more homogenized. That folks who hold different political perspectives, different this, different that, are having much less interaction with each other than was true a generation ago. They don't live near each other anymore. Red state, blue states. The red's getting redder, the blue's getting bluer. I mean, congregations used to be one of the places where folks from different walks of life and perspectives learned how to share friendships. It was back when Republicans and Democrats could tease each other and be good friends. Some of you remember with nostalgia or regret that era and how different it is now. So this Aristotelian friendship of pleasure, I think, has become more dangerous than ever. But of course, who is it always a pleasure to be with? Not me, probably not most of you. And we can dispose of friends who are no longer pleasurable when it's no longer do we find it pleasant to be with them. There's nothing to make us hang in through the hard times if pleasure is the primary motivator. You know, another way to frame that, a true friendship, and we'll get to Aristotle's definition of it. Let's go to that and come back. It says the only real friendships, the complete ones, are based upon virtue, meaning the purpose of the friendship is that we commit to helping one another be better people who will live better lives. We are building on values together to do good in the world. I can be a better person in the world because my friends are helping me to do that. And part of the role of a friend in that regard is holding me accountable to the best that is within me. You know, as someone who's performed a lot of weddings, I counsel couples about that and usually try to work at the wedding ceremony. God, I'm quoting Stanley Hauerwas again, God's rather, so many wedding things are about, it's all going to be about your joy and your pleasure and endless walks on the beach and glass of wine with a candlelight. It says, God is in the end pretty indifferent to your personal happiness. God put you together in marriage because God thinks he can get more good out of the two of you together than either one of you apart. I think that's very close to the scriptural foundation of that. I believe the same thing about friendship. And that means, to use a phrase I like a lot, friendship is a relationship of mutual affirmation and admonition. Okay? We affirm the best that is in our friend, and we admonish our friend when he or she is not living up to that. And that means getting in your friend's face once in a while. And in a very privatistic, individualistic culture, we tend not to take that risk. So if we get the sense our friend is going down the wrong path, messing around with somebody else's spouse, dipping his finger in the till at work, instead of confronting the friend, we withdraw. We just stop calling, we just drop them, because we are cowards. Because we are cowards. And bear with me, I think this has something to do with friendship and dementia. Because if we look at these categories, others who have served as a pastor, and we have a couple here who work with older members, have heard so many versions of that, just, I never want to be a burden on my children. Why not? They were a burden on you. But that is the great sin in consumer culture, capitalist culture, is not being able to give back as much or more than what we receive. So the fear is that if we're no longer useful to our friends, or sufficiently useful, they will choose not to be friends with me anymore. And sadly, sometimes it's really true. Too often it's true. And then the twin thing, I'm no fun to be with anymore. I'm not a pleasure. It's hard work to be with me. And yes, friends do disappear. And they disappear, as you heard from some of Susan's earlier slides, not just from the life of the person with the diagnosis, but from his or her care partners as well. Isolation is a huge problem for care partners, affecting their physical health, certainly affecting their financial health, because we're seeing more and more about days lost to work and losing jobs because they're trying to juggle all these roles. And where are their friends? Their friends are stating good intentions and saying these amazingly unhelpful things like, well, call me if you need anything. Okay, in a country wired for independence, we don't call and say, I really need you now. And instead of saying, call me if you need anything, you say, could I come for a couple hours on Tuesday and stay with your husband so you can get some things done? But we aren't in the habit of making specific and useful offers. Can I do this for you? Can I do that for you? Hey, I'm going to be out grocery shopping anyway. I'm coming back to congregations and say, if we are not being a school for creating and living these kinds of virtuous friendships, where we understand friendship as a commitment every bit as deep as marriage or partnership, then we aren't understanding why God calls us into congregations. And that we are not free to end a friendship on the basis of changes in usefulness of our friend or pleasure of our friend. And dementia is not an excuse to end a friendship. It's a growth opportunity to begin to live and enjoy that friendship in new ways. So there's Aristotle. Here's where I want to spend a little bit of time. And at least you've heard me go through this before. I think you can handle it again. When we started writing our book, I wanted to read the literature and the theology of dementia, and I found it didn't exist. So I went to the theology of disability, which there was a rich body of, and worked with some good mentors on how to reframe that in terms of dementia, because it is just another disability, just one that we had been too frightened to think of. Something I don't have up in the slide, but let me just state something, that dementia confronts us with the truth about our own nature being an identity that we are most afraid of and most wish to deny. It confronts us with the truth that what defines us as human is that, one, we are all vulnerable, and two, we are all absolutely dependent upon others. And boy, do we hate that. And boy, do we wish for it not to be true. Vulnerability, anybody who's evincing vulnerability, scares us because we are forced to remember that we are vulnerable, that, as is said, every day, every minute is a gift of God. And, self-made men and women don't want to think about vulnerability, and certainly they don't want to know that they're dependent upon others. So dependency We hate it, we hate it, we hate it. But Hauerwas, Stan Hauerwas said, in all times and cultures, people have been most frightened of whatever represents the greatest threat to their fundamental identity as a self. So as we go to the time of Jesus, if you will, when Judaism was dominated by the Sadducean school, which did not believe in individual survival after death or an immortal soul, selfhood and the image of God were understood almost completely in terms of corporality. That is, your body was you. Okay? And your body was what was in the image of God. I mean, where do you think we got all those ancient images of the Lord God walking in the garden and all, that God was imagined to look like us, only, and we were just, the old guy with the hair on the throne and the beard and all, that's anthropomorphizing, but the anthropomorphizing came because we believe corporality was selfhood in the divine image. So if you believe your body is the pure essence of you, of selfhood, what disease is going to scare the heck out of you?
Leprosy.
Leprosy. Mm-hmm. Because it changed your body, the you, disfigured, contorted. You were no longer the same person. But it was a triple whammy, because once you were identified as a leper, you were no longer fully in the divine image, or to use another bit of language, you were no longer a perfect offering. And as an imperfect offering, you could no longer enter the sacred holy temple, any more than an amputee or a castrati could. You were no longer worthy to enter fully into the presence of God. Oh great, now I'm no longer me, and now I can't enter into the presence of God. I guess I'll go back to the village. Where, of course, under purity laws, the priest would declare you unclean, and you were removed from your normal role in the web of relationships that constitute community. Anybody came too close, unclean! Good public health policy. Not so good for continuing selfhood and self-esteem and worth. And you got fed and taken care of, but you were cut off from your role in relationship to others. So you've lost relationship with self, lost relationship with the cosmic, transcendent, divine, and now your relationship with other human beings. No wonder people were scared to death. All right? So now you say, well, what a foolish, inadequate definition it was to think of self and imago Dei, image of God, in terms of corporal body. We now know that has nothing to do with selfhood or identity or personhood or the image of God. No, we are post-enlightenment. I think, therefore I am. So cognition has been, for many, many years, the definer of selfhood and the divine image, right? I think, therefore I am. I think, and therefore I think I am. I do not think, and therefore I cannot think that I am not. Whatever you want to phrase it as, but that is, Shakespeare, what a piece of work as a man, the Psalms, all the rest of it. We are the crown of creation. And therefore, the image of God thing, I hate sentimentality in religion, and one of the things I hate, I have a long list of sentimental things in religion I hate, but one of them is the old saw. So why did God make men and women? Well, God made men and women because God was lonely and God needed someone to talk to. What kind of rinky-dink, two-bit deity gets lonely and needs me to talk to? God is complete in God's self. We'll talk about that in a moment. But we just think that we're in the divine image compared to all other human beings because we are differentiated from all creation because of the clever things we can do. The only being that can make tools. What is that chimpanzee doing with that stick? The only animal with language. Shut up, you dolphins. On it goes about, and the only animal that's altruistic. Well, we've already taken care of that one too. We're down to just a handful of distinctive things about us, and we're left. The only reason why we're uniquely in God's image is because God, in holy, loving will, chooses to be in relationship to us. It's nothing very unique or special about us. But here's the fear. the images of when cognition is selfhood, the changes in memory loss and cognition is. I love a line. A friend of mine who at a young age suffered a very severe stroke, and as he was recovering some speech and thought patterns were coming better, but it's still hard to speak in normal sentences. And he was asked by a doctor what kind of sensation he was feeling, and he says, "Myself has left the premises." Mm-hmm. And I thought poetically he was really capturing an inner experience. Myself has left the premises. And that's a fear if self is understood in terms of cognitive, rational facility and memory. Can losing cognition take away your relationship with the divine and the Almighty? We'll talk about that in a moment. It can certainly take away normal, I talked about the leper not going to the temple. Folks with dementia tend to disappear from their congregations for any number of reasons. Usually it's harder to get dressed and ready and go, and I know all that part of it. But the excuses I've heard from family members about, why isn't Ron coming to church anymore? Well, he doesn't get anything out of it anymore. Which usually meant he can no longer follow your exquisitely reasoned sermon. He said if that were the criteria for getting something out of worship, fully half the people there that morning got nothing out of it, right? How about hearing the texts he's been hearing all his life and still live, and the hymns he can still sing that he's been singing all his life? How about just being greeted by people who've known and cherished in his own life, greeted by name with a smile? He gets nothing out of that. So it's the embarrassment in the family. Sometimes he's inappropriate and he shouts something out. Yeah, but we encourage parents to bring their children to church, and that's what children do for a living. They shout out inappropriate things at inappropriate times. So it's all cop-outs, it's all excuses, but it's that embarrassment and stigma and all the rest of this that can cost that connection with God through the community of faith and the web of relationships with friends as they withdraw and fade. So if we can agree that corporality is an inadequate definition of selfhood, divine image, we all okay with that? Mm-hmm. You are not your body? Mm-hmm. Okay. Are you your brain? Are you your cognitive, rational self? Or is there something more to you than that? So what's left, ladies and gentlemen? How shall we define selfhood if not through body and not through cognition? We are left with relationship. Relationship. Now, we speak in a lot of settings where we can't talk about religion. We had a version of this conversation with Nancy earlier. You can't get any CEUs if there's going to be religion. And we speak in medical school sometimes. No religion. But I'm allowed to talk about spirituality because it's so lifty and nobody knows what it means. It means everything and nothing all at once. So we had to find a model that we could talk about and still look at ourselves in the mirror. And this comes from, some of you might know Liz McKinley out of Australia. She's an Anglican priest and a gerontologist. And this, to me, makes a lot of sense, whether you're religious or not. That spirituality is how we mediate ultimate meaning through, for her, 4 spheres. And won't go through all this except to say that all of them have to do with how we relate to and interpret ourselves in light of something beyond us which is greater than us. We're moving away from self-reference to broader reference. And for most of us, certainly here today, that's going to be mediated by religion, right? And we'll talk about that specifically in a minute. But even if religion is your primary source of spiritual meaning, you're also going to other sources. One is your relationships with other people. We're talking a minute about Martin Buber, the I-thou relationship with other human beings, each of whom is a sacred mystery. The environment, or if you prefer, God's good created order, knowing oneself to be in relationship to that greater order of things. And then this, and I think it's brilliant, says, as those wider things are also interpreted, mediated, and touched and experienced through the arts. And Susan's already talked about how the arts continue to be accessible both in receiving and giving within dementia, sometimes even unlocked. Now, there's no wrong way to interpret a piece of art. There's no wrong way to draw meaning and identity from it.